Morning everybody, this finds me in Dien Bien Phu on the famous Mong Thang Bridge. This bridge was built by the French military, I think in early 1954, to aid their military preparations for the bated battle with the Viet Minh that they had planned for Dien Bien Phu, with the idea of defeating the Vietnamese forever. This bridge was extremely useful logistically, and after the French were bombarded and surrounded and coming to the end of their campaign, the Viet Minh used this exact bridge to storm across it with their troops, exactly in the place I'm walking now, to invade and finally finish off the French position, which is just over there. I'm going to visit the military bunker in a minute. Now, you can see the guys here, they're setting up some celebration with Vietnamese flags. I'm not sure if it's their national day. I thought their national day has just passed. All this battle of Dien Bien Phu, this famous battle, happened in the spring of 1954. So it was roughly between about March and May. So it's not March and May, so I don't quite know why all these flags are suddenly going up, but I mean, I'm sure there's a very good reason. So this is interesting. Let's try and get a better view of this bridge. It's built by the military, and it's still here, 70, 80 years later. So let's go on, try to find the French position, the command bunker. So this is the French commander bunker. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that they're going to let me in. I'm going to try and get in, but let's see. So it was here, this is the command bunker, the French command bunker, that the occupation of Dien Bien Phu and their baiting of the Viet Minh forces to come and get us, right? They blocked the shipment of arms to Laos by stationing here, and they're trying to force the Viet Minh into an open battlefield war rather than the guerrilla war, which they found impossible to win. The French found impossible to win. So these flat plains, which unfortunately are surrounded by mountains, unfortunately for the French, but fortunate for the Vietnamese, the mountains were quickly loaded up with heavy Viet Minh artillery, which they'd handballed across from all other parts of northern Vietnam. The French really were very, very arrogant. They didn't believe the Viet Minh had the capabilities of doing such a thing. But as so often, the Viet Minh surpassed all expectations and very quickly completely surrounded the French garrison here. The garrison was made up mainly of legionnaires, and they were often mercenaries. I don't know how good a fighting force they were, but certainly they didn't have the motivation of the Vietnamese or the Viet Minh, who were fighting for their freedom, their liberty, their nation, right? The French were fighting for what? To hold on to a post-war colonial possession. So the motivation is really just not the same. So after the Viet Minh surrounded the French, they pounded the French, pounded them with their artillery cannons up in the mountains. And every time the French tried to return fire, they pulled their artillery back into the pre-dug tunnels so they weren't destroyed by the returning French artillery. The logic here of the French was they were going to be resupplied by the air, because there's an airstrip right next door here. But that quickly fell away when the Vietnamese bombarded the airport, potholed the airport, and shot down so many planes that were coming to resupply. This meant that the only resupply to here was by parachute. And quite often the parachutes would drift in the wind, and the equipment and food and provisions for the troops often ended up going to the Viet Minh. So this is very interesting. Command bunker. So what I'm going to do, let's go and explore. So I don't know if you can read that. I'll read it for you. Headquarters of the Dien Bien Phu Fortress Group of the French Expeditionary Army. At 1730 hours on May the 7th, 1954, a short group led by Comrade Ta Quoc Lat, apologise for the lack of proper pronunciation, company commander of the 360th Company, 209th Regiment, 312th Division, entered and captured General de Castres, is that? I thought it was Castrates, but no, it's not. General Castres alive, and the entire general staff of the Dien Bien Phu Fortress Group. And let's just take a quick look around from ground level. Yeah. That's interesting, huh? So I'm really glad Vietnam has preserved this, and I think it's, you know, this predates the American conflict. When the French gave up, basically, that's when the Americans moved in. And initially the Americans weren't so keen to support the Vietnamese, to support the French, because the French were chasing colonialism, and America allegedly stands against that. Although I'm not quite so sure these days. But when the Americans realised that the French were giving up, and it meant that the communists, the Vietnamese communists, were going to take over, that's when they stepped in. You know, why did Vietnam turn to communism? Well, I think people have, so I've read, people postulate that it was because it was only the communists who would listen to them. The Western society wouldn't. If you look at when Ho Chi Minh proclaimed independence in 1945, he actually included bits of the American Constitution in the Vietnamese Constitution. So I think there was a lot of admiration for the Americans at that time. But it was only when the Americans became aware that they were turning to communism because no one else would listen when they wanted independence, that they started supporting the French with money, with arms, and then after the French left, they then took over, and the rest, as they say, is history. But the Americans were never really involved in fighting in the north part of Vietnam, apart from some of their relentless bombing campaigns. And that wasn't really here, that was centered around Hanoi and the shipyards. But here in Dien Bien Phu, it was very much the only conflict was with France. Right, here we go. I mean, this is the exact place where in May, I think it was May the 7th, 1954, the Viet Minh general who stormed this place captured the French general alive and then accepted his surrender. Wow, this is really like World War I trench warfare. You can see that the trenches is just above head height. I don't know how much, I believe I read that they were severely affected by the rains and the whole place flooded out, and there was a lot of disease and malaria, I believe, was going on at that time on both sides, but particularly with the French. So as we go inside the bunker here, right, oh look, it's a whole network. So here we are, look, I don't know if you can see that. That's a battlefield map. Each of the surrounding hillets have French names. You have Anna Marie, I can't pronounce, John, Dominique, Elaine, Beatrice. Right, these were code names that they had. So that's quite interesting. Gabrielle, right? Yeah, presumably the boss man sat here. Interesting construction. These seems to be iron reinforcing the concrete on the roof and the walls, and presumably they're sandbags. Yeah, I can't read Vietnamese, but yeah, it's a shame the original one's not in French, but I think these are talking about the number of fatalities, I believe. I'm not quite sure. Let's keep exploring, shall we? Can we have another map here? Yeah. These all. I'm going to go up some of these hills later. Right. I can't remember the name of the one I'm going to go up, but it's right next to my hotel. So, yeah, you just imagine what it was like when you were here, when the French commander was here, you know, under constant bombardment from the hills, from the Viet Minh. Must have been quite terrifying. But I think, I've said it before, it was the arrogance of the French. You know, they were Français, you know, they were the French, they were Western. How can these little Asian people fight so fiercely? I think they didn't learn their Vietnamese history, and I think, in my humble opinion, the most important thing is the motivation to fight. Right, the French mercenaries, the legionnaires, I mean, I think they were in it for the money, and the French nation was in it for, maybe they'd lost so much face over their defeat by the Germans in France in 1940 that they desperately wanted to, restore their pride. So they're not good reasons to fight. Whereas the Vietnamese were fighting for their country, their independence, their liberty. And later, it would be the same situation against the Americans. And it always sounds funny to me, having to have such a long, drawn-out war against America on the basis of fighting for their freedom and their liberty against America, who was trying to suppress it. This is crazy. Yeah, so really interesting. In 1954, early 1954, the French, you can say, invaded, or they landed in Dien Bien Phu by parachute to start their campaign to lure the Viet Minh into this area. Behind me is an M24 tank, a French tank, and they dropped 10 tanks in parts, in bits, because they couldn't get them here otherwise, because there was no roads, etc. So they dropped them by parachute, and they had them assembled here. And this is one of them. And this was the last one that was captured. And it's interesting. I'll show you a very interesting feature in a minute. So here's a closer look at the barrel of the tank, and I want to show you what I found round on the side. Well, there's a shell hole straight through it. So presumably the occupants didn't survive. I mean, obviously I don't know, but such as the horrors of warfare. This one, I don't know if you can notice that. was burned by artillery fire at 4:30 on May the 7th. So that was the last day of the battle. In fact, that was a day of the surrender. Oh, they weigh something. So presumably everyone inside there died. Such as the evil of warfare. This is one of the 105mm French cannons, which were stationed at strategic positions around where the French were encamped. This one was destroyed by Vietnamese cannon fire on March the 13th, 1954. Yeah, and I just stumbled on this. This is what's left of it. But it seems largely intact, I guess. So we'll just have a closer look at this cannon, or what's left of it. You can see the recoil spring there. I guess that's what that's called. I'm no military expert. In fact, I know almost nothing. But I'm interested in the politics of it, and I'm interested in the colonial, the freedom struggle of nations like Vietnam. So this is the actual heart of the battlefield, where the French forces fought the Viet Minh amid ferocious bombardment from the surrounding hills. And this led to their isolation after the airport was cut off, and eventually their capitulation, their surrender, and the end of French colonialism, much hated French colonialism, I must say, in Vietnam. But unfortunately, as we shall see when I start to travel south, may have been the end of French, but it was only the beginning of the American involvement. So here we are, look. I've just stumbled across another cannon. It's another 105mm cannon. Now these were pounding the Viet Minh positions on the hills. But what the French didn't realise, that the Viet Minh was so smart, they'd actually dug tunnels in the hills so that the Vietnamese cannons, they would bring them out, fire the shots, and then quickly retract them back in the tunnel. So that when the French pinpointed the firing position and returned fire, the fire was useless because they were protected by the tunnels. Yeah. I mean, when you walk around a place like this, you think of all the horrors that happened in any warfare. You know, how many French people, how many Vietnamese people died here, and for what? For what? You know. Yeah. I wonder if there's any unexploded shells here. There probably is, you know. Although I think the ground's been searched quite thoroughly. But, you know, they're easy to miss. So this is where it all happened. This is where all the fighting was. This is where French occupation came to an end. You know, Vietnam have set up what is like a wartime heritage trail, you can say. And I think it's great. They're all numbered. This one's number 4. And presumably this was the actual position, you know, of this cannon, of every cannon. This is a 155mm howitzer, so somewhat more powerful than the 105mm cannons that we were just looking at. I've just seen a lizard just crawl. I don't know if you got that. A lizard just crawling there, but you know, you can see these, presumably these are shell holes here. Let's have a look around. When you imagine, you know, these were defending the French garrison. Yeah, amazing, huh? I always feel saddened, you know. Senseless waste of life. A 155mm cannon belonging to the artillery field of the Central Division of Dien Bien Phu Fortress, that's the French, was destroyed by artillery shells from the Viet Minh on March the 13th, 1954. So there we are. You know, you can see quite a lot of damage on this. Yeah. If you look closely, look, you can see all sorts of damage on it. Like here, right? On the barrel. Now it's very typical, everything moves on a motorbike in Vietnam. You can see that barrier is how they carry, right, to market. Hello! This turnip, huh? If I had a way of cooking that, I'd buy some, but unfortunately I don't. Come on, huh? Even motorbikes are mobile market stalls. Veggie. Hello, hello. Wow, corn and broccoli. Wish I could cook it. I'd buy some. There's an interesting bicycle. Sweet potato, but it's not cooked. Hello. I wish it was cooked. I want to eat. Got ground nuts. I don't know what this is. What's this? I don't know what that is. A bit of a tree. Everything on a motorbike. Markets, me. What a great place. I love Vietnam. It's just so fascinating. Everyone here is so cheerful. Everybody. Almost everybody, you know. Well, I've just had a quick sprint up these stairs here. This is one of the hills surrounding the airfield, which is now an airport that you can see below, which at the left-hand side of the airport, that's where the command bunker and the main French garrison was. Now, protecting that garrison was a series of small hills like this one, where they had a number of French troops up here defending against attack. But the attack came mainly in the form of bombardment from the hills surrounding. And the French really got such a beating. And I'm not sorry about that. Of course, unfortunately, is loss of life, but to be frank, they shouldn't have been here in the first place. So that was the original airstrip that was going to, initially did, provide air supply of ammunition, food, medicines, etc. But after the shelling from those hills, and the Vietnamese basically destroyed the runway and shot down any aircraft coming close, it became useless and they became isolated. So as I've said before, they had to rely on parachute drops. Yeah, good bit of exercise this morning. So we'll come and have a look at this monument in a minute. So this is the Vietnamese monument commemorating victory over the French in Dien Bien Phu. Liberation from colonial oppression, only to be followed by American oppression. So this was one of about 6 hills, I think there was. This one was known as Dominique, or Dominique II, I think. And yes, they all had French female names, so that's very French for sure. But you can see what a commanding position it has over the airfield and over the surrounding countryside, the other side. Unfortunately, it didn't really do much good because the Vietnamese were much smarter than the French. And these hills were overrun one by one. And after they were overrun, the Viet Minh moved in to the central garrison and the command bunker and forced a French complete unconditional surrender. Lots of bunkers and trenches and these defensive positions that were built by the French, or the French and Algerians, using Algerian soldiers as well as French, to so-called defend against the Viet Minh. How can you defend when it's the Viet Minh's country? You know, that's just a weird concept. You know, even if you're defending, you're still the attackers if you don't belong in that country, right? Yeah, this was one of the French army's strongest held positions, even though the hill is a lot smaller than Dominique that we previously visited. There was some vicious, brutal, intense fighting here, and eventually by May the 7th the French were defeated. If we can go down here, let's have a look. Don't mind my head. Well, I don't have a torch, so I don't think I'm going to go down there. But you can see it's an elaborate tunnel system for the defenders. Should have bought a torch, shouldn't I? Oh well. I don't think the iPhone torch is strong enough. Probably rats down there or something. Fortified command bunker of the hill fortress. Yeah. Here we go. They've got big noses. They must be French people. Look. And they've got berets. Radio communication. Glass doors, presumably. There's another bunker here. This is real First World War stuff, isn't it? But the Viet Minh saw the French garrison when they established themselves, which I think was February 1954, as an opportunity, not as a threat. They immediately thought, great, we can get them, and they did. Have a look. God, this is creepy, isn't it? Huh? Got a little bit of light. Hopefully there's not a monster down here, a monster rat or something. There's probably a toilet at the end or something. Oh. Whoa! Nearly fell over. That way's got a way out. This way's all dark. Let's be brave, shall we? Wow. Should have left one of those, you know, where you have a ball of string and then you unroll it to so you can trace your route back. Hope I don't get lost. A minute, so I've got to go this way. Right. Just pitch black in here. I've only got my iPhone light. Help, let me out, Mummy. I can see some light there. Let's go towards that, shall we? Ah, we survived. Out we come. Out we come. Well, this tank looks in rather better condition. Like it was never blown up, I guess. I mean, of course, I'm not sure, but I think it's another M24. Maybe it wasn't that useful on the top of the big hill. I don't know. More trenches. It really was a strongly fortified position. And there's a big crater over there. I don't know whether that was dropped by a was it a bomb or something blowing up some trenches? I don't know. Let's try and find out, shall we? There's a notice up here, look. Let's check that out. Here we go. The explosion crater was formed by comrades Nguyen Pu Xuyen and some others, who I can't pronounce, who fired a 960 kilogram explosive mass on May the 6th. The explosive force destroyed an array of battlefields, destroyed most of the 2nd Airborne Company, stunned the French, and created an important opportunity for an attack on the entire hill of A1. So that's what a ton of explosives does. That's a pretty big crater. That's like B-52 bomb size. But you can see all the network of trenches all over this place, this hill A1. And again, you can see what a commanding view it has. But there again, this hill is dwarfed by the surrounding hills. So the Viet Minh who are in the surrounding hills had an elevated position, and therefore the advantage, and could shell this position and other French positions and the airfield from these surrounded mountains. So the French believed, when they decided to set up their garrison here, that the Viet Minh wouldn't have the artillery and wouldn't be able to bring them to this remote place. But they underestimated the determination of the Viet Minh and their desire to have freedom and make their country independent. So this is the rather modern looking museum about the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and I'm quite happy because as I'm 65 I got in for half price, so there. So let's see what it's like. So this is in the museum, and I'm not going to film much in here, but these are French helmets, which you can see all the bullet holes in them and shrapnel damage.